you all for coming out today. It's a beautiful day out there. We came over from Rapid City last night. I flew into Rapid City, got there about 10 o'clock, and Trinity came and picked me up, and so we stayed there and then got up and drove over this morning. So it was a very pretty drive out there today. Can everybody hear me okay? Is everybody all right? Wonderful. So should we go ahead and get started, Trinity? Should we go ahead and get started?
Yes, I think that's a great idea. If you would, I think, should we start with the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes,
we have
please.
a flag right over here.
Yes.
So let's go ahead and rise and salute the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right.
And I think by way of starting, I just wanted to say something in relation to the city of Upton, the town of Upton. They were phenomenal to work with on setting all of this up. So if you see the mayor or his staff, please thank them on our behalf, because this was wonderful. They've been great to work with. And thank you to each of you for being here this morning. With that, we'll hand it over to the Congresswoman.
Yes, thank you all for being here today. I don't even know which number this is for town halls. I think it's possibly 16. But I promised when I campaigned that I would come back to every county every year and do a town hall. And I started in January, just as soon as I came back the first time after I had been in office for just a couple of weeks. I started doing town halls, and I have continued to do so every time that I have come home. So I will be here for a few days. I'm doing this today. I'll be over in Moorcroft later today, and then tonight in Hewlett. We have the Crook County Lincoln Day dinner, and we will be there. And then tomorrow, Sunday, I will be doing the Congressional Medals in Cheyenne. So Zita Anderson and I will be leaving tonight and heading back to Cheyenne, and I'll be home for a day. And then I'm going to be touring a platform, an oil and gas rig in the Gulf of Mexico on Tuesday with Steve Scalise. So I'll fly down there on Monday, and then I'll fly back here on Wednesday. So I think that's going to be a very interesting and informative experience as well. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to tell you what I have been doing and what I've been focusing on. I know several of you have mentioned some of my hearings that you have observed or watched on TV or YouTube or that sort of thing. And I'll tell you a bit more about that and about those and what we're trying to do and what we're accomplishing. And then I'll just open it up for questions and a discussion. One of the very first town halls I went to was in Lander, and there were 5 foot of snow on the ground. It was very, very cold in January, and it was a great turnout. And the first question that was asked was, "Why are you here?" And I said, well, I don't know how to represent you if I don't come and talk to you. And we are a republic. We are a constitutional republic. We're a representative form of government. And it's important for me to talk to you about what I'm doing, but it's as important for you to talk to me about what you want me to do. And I've had a couple of comments today about some of our other representatives, and there gets to be frustrations when we don't come home and talk to you guys about what's going on. You're not going to agree with everything I do, and that's okay. That's just kind of, that's life. We're not cookie cutters. We're not exactly the same people. But I always want to be able to come home and talk to you about why I've taken the votes that I have and why I've made the decisions that I have, and have you interrogate me on that and perhaps change my mind or help me to have a better understanding of where you're coming from. I want to start with the election of Kevin McCarthy, and it may seem like that is a little bit of old news, but the reason it's very important is because it is impacting us still to this day. By us, I mean the Republican members of Congress and how we're doing our business there in Washington, D.C. When I first got back there, what I found out is that we don't spend much time with each other. We maybe go in and vote and spend maybe 15 or 20 minutes on the floor. You might talk to 8 or 10 different people, but you don't have an opportunity to get into an in-depth discussion with your fellow congressmen and congresswomen. And as a result, you don't really know who those folks are. Whether they're from Wisconsin or New Mexico or Florida or North Carolina, you never get a good handle on who they are, what makes them tick, what their agendas are, and why they're there. And as a result, I think that place has become fairly dysfunctional because everybody is kind of a silo in and of themselves. That changed with the election of Kevin McCarthy. When we did that vote, it took us 15 votes, and every one of those votes took over 90 minutes. So in those 4 days, we were together for over 25 hours. And we really didn't have an opportunity to leave the floor. We had to stay there or in the cloakroom where we can meet and visit. And we talked, and we talked a lot. We talked a lot about Wyoming. We talked about why I ran. I was pretty high profile because I beat Liz Cheney. And I had a lot of support from people there even before I got there. And they wanted to know, who is this woman who took on and defeated Liz Cheney? And I took that opportunity to really talk about my agenda and the fact that I wasn't running against Liz Cheney. I was running for Wyoming. And that's why I did what I did. And what does that mean? What is my agenda? What do I want to do? And I had the opportunity to talk to people about the regulatory burden in this country and what the EPA and Fish and Wildlife Service and Forest Service are doing to us, what they're doing to our oil and gas industry, what they're doing to our coal industry, what they're doing to our food industry. And I took the opportunity to talk about why I thought that the new weaponization committee that was going to be formed, that I wanted to be on that with my background as a trial attorney, as a constitutional attorney, as a water and natural resource attorney. And I really took the opportunity to get to know other folks, but I also took the opportunity to talk a lot about why Wyoming is so important to the future of the United States of America. And it actually turned out to be a very positive thing for me and for the state of Wyoming. I ended up getting the committee assignments that I wanted, which was on the Judiciary Committee and on the Natural Resource Committee. On Judiciary, I'm also on the 2 subcommittees of Constitutional and Limited Government, and then I'm also on the subcommittee related to Administrative and Regulatory Reform. I also have been elected by the freshman class to be on the policy committee to set policy for the entire body. So working with leadership and having the voice of the people there to talk about what we need to be moving forward in terms of our agenda. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in terms of what our highest priority has been, which is energy independence. And that's something that I've been talking about since the day that I got there. And I'm not the only one who sees the importance of that, but I definitely have taken every chance that I could to explain why it's so critically important for the future of our country. So I also got up to be on the Natural Resource Committee. And on natural resources, I am on the Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries Subcommittee. But I also have been appointed as the chairman of the Subcommittee on Indian and Insular Affairs. So I oversee all 574 tribes in the United States, plus our 5 territories. Puerto Rico, American Samoa, U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, and the Northern Mariana Islands. So that has been a very interesting opportunity, and one that I've had an opportunity to really learn and grow about a lot of important things, not only to our tribes, but to our culture and our history. So by having that vote and being able to spend the time together that we did, it gave me an opportunity, as I said, to talk a lot about Wyoming, but there's something else that it did that has shown to be extremely valuable. And that is, it brought all of us, the Republicans, our conference, it brought us very, very close together. And as a result, it's actually made that body more conservative than it otherwise would have been. And I come from the conservative end of the spectrum. I believe in limited government. I believe in our Constitution. I believe that the power should be at the state level and not with the feds. I don't believe that unelected bureaucrats should be making the decisions for us, that our elected officials should be held accountable for the decisions that they make. But we've been able to bring a lot of people, and I know who some of them were, who are going to vote more liberally than we have. But you know what? We've been able to hold that conference together. And this week, something really amazing happened, and that is we were able to put together a bill, and with all but 4 of our Republican conference, we have passed out a debt limit increase bill that, according to the many people there, is one of the most conservative and the very best one they ever have. I don't want to raise the debt. I mean, we all know that. We all know we're headed for a train wreck. But included in that debt limit bill, we have cut almost $5 trillion of additional spending. Almost $5 trillion of additional spending. We also put HR 1, which is our #1 agenda item, which is our energy bill. That is included in its entirety in that bill for raising the debt limit. If this were to be passed, it would be the most significant reform of permitting and energy development in our country's history. Included in H.R. 1 is My Coal Act, which is to force the Secretary of Interior to start granting permits for additional coal development in the state of Wyoming. That is one of the most important things I see for our state in here. And the remainder of this is about oil and gas development and being able to proceed with accessing and securing our own energy resources and also ensuring our own national security, because energy security is national security. So this bill is included in that debt limit increase, which is just very, very important, and I thought it was an extremely important strategy move. But the other thing is, other than 4 people, everybody in that conference said, we've got some pretty broad philosophies in there. We all came together to do that because we knew it was the right thing to do. We've now put ourselves in the position where it is up to the Senate and Joe Biden, and they are going to have to respond. And just simply saying we have to have a clean debt limit isn't the answer. The press knows it, they know it, the president knows it. Washington, D.C., when we passed that, you should have seen the look on, number one, the press. There was a lot of press there that day, the Washington Post, the New York Times. They don't always sit in there when we're in session, but that day the press gallery was full, and they didn't think we could do it. And it came down to the last couple of minutes. It was a 15-minute vote. It came down to the last couple of minutes, and we were 3 or 4 votes shy. And it was pretty stressful, and there was a lot of tension in there. And we got those last couple of votes. And the Democrats and the press didn't expect that we were going to be able to do it. And I believe that cohesiveness and that understanding of the importance of this really goes back to our ability to work together on the Kevin McCarthy election. Mm-hmm. The other thing about my voting for Kevin McCarthy, and I had people who contacted me and said, we don't want you to support him, and I understood what they were saying and had a lot of conversations. Kevin McCarthy had made a lot of commitments to me before we ever walked in there on January 3rd about some of the rule changes that were going to be made, that needed to be made. Starting with John Boehner, really everything in the House has come out of the Speaker's office. He really ran that place with an iron fist, which is the wrong way to do it. You guys are the ones in charge, not him. He was bad. Paul Ryan was worse. And Nancy Pelosi was unbearable.
Yes.
In the last 4 years, there has been nothing that did not come out of the Speaker's house, and for over 10 years, we've never been allowed to do an amendment from the floor. Now, I obviously wasn't there, so maybe I shouldn't say we, but I consider myself part of that body. But talking to the people who have been there, the frustration that they have been through for the last 10 years was palpable. There was a reason why it became very emotional and why people felt as strongly as they did, because not only did it disenfranchise them as representatives or us as representatives, it completely disenfranchised all of you. We have not had a voice in our government for years and years and years, and that changed. Kevin McCarthy made most of those commitments before he went in there on January 3rd, but there were some other things that needed to be addressed, and they were. I was not opposed to what the 20 people did. You know, Chip Roy is fabulous. Eli Crane. There are some really good people. Dan Bishop. That really good people who really took a hard line on that. And it was the right thing to do, and it needed to be done. Debate is not a bad thing. Our form of government can be messy, and that's okay. We're all individuals, so it's okay to have that kind of a discussion. I know that, again, the national press especially wanted to be critical of us, saying, well, you can't even govern. That is governing. That is governing. That's making sure that everybody's voice is heard. So I go back to that, even though in some ways it's ancient history, but I really want people to understand what some of the things were that we were doing. The other thing that has happened through that process is that, you know, in December, the Senate did, and the House eventually voted on a $1.7 trillion, 4,000-page omnibus spending bill. Absolute monstrosity. Absolute monstrosity. My predecessor voted for it. And it is, I can't even begin to describe for you how destructive that one bill was to this country and will be for a long, long time. That's the bill where they put in the Green New Deal, a lot of the Green New Deal, to basically destroy our traditional forms of energy production without really having any ability to produce energy any other way. But it's massive amounts of money to people like Bill Gates and other millionaires and billionaires to continue down this green road with the subsidies. So a lot of that stuff, we've pulled that all out with this bill. The bill that we passed this week, the debt increase, we're pulling most of those subsidies out so that we can stop this nonsense. So that's one of the very important things. But one of the other rule changes we made is that no bill can be more than one subject. We have put on notes. So most of our bills are 1 and 2 pages. Our bills are, I don't even know if I have any, I should have brought some of mine. They're probably back in my briefcase, but our bills can only have one subject. And so every amendment has to go through an analysis of whether it is germane. So one of the very first bills that we did, there were 150 amendments that were proposed by the Democrats, but only 48 of them were determined to be germane. So then we went on the floor, we did a 2-minute vote series. It was really wild, it was exciting, you had to pay a lot of attention to what was going on to know which amendment it was, what it was going to do, that sort of thing. But we did a 2-minute vote series over 2 days, and we addressed all 48 of those amendments. But over 100 of them were not found to be germane. Just this week in a markup, I've introduced a bill to delist the grizzly bears, the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem grizzly bears. We had a markup on that this week, and the Democrats are always trying to derail those kinds of things. But a lot of their amendments were not germane. And so we don't even have to bother with them. So that was one of the things. The other thing is we will not take up a bill with less than 72 hours notice. So again, that omnibus spending bill, it runs to the House at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday, and they voted on it at 8 o'clock the next morning. No more. And we've put the Senate on notice. We have put the Senate on notice. Now, fortunately, the Senate isn't working right now. And I mean that in a lot of different ways. Part of the reason I say that is because they've had several of the Democrats have been out. Dianne Feinstein in California, until recently Fetterman from Pennsylvania, and then what's his name broke his leg, and so he was out, he broke his femur, so he was out. So they haven't been able to take up much because the Democrats don't have a majority, which is a good thing. So, but we've made it very clear, don't send us this nonsense, because by our rules, we can't even take it up. So those are some of the other important changes. We also will not allow an increase in spending without a decrease in spending. So there are some very important things. There's going to be a showdown. One of the terrible things about that omnibus spending bill, and it was intentional by the Republicans too, and there were 18 Republican senators who voted in favor of that omnibus spending bill. And Team McConnell, he pushed it, and he shouldn't have. And I'm not happy with him. I've not met him or had a chance to talk to him, but I will tell him what I think of what he did to us, because they intended to do it to strip us from our power of the purse. It is the House of Representatives that has the power of the purse, and that's how we dictate policy in this country. It's perfectly legitimate. It is what our founders intended us to do. Mm-hmm. When this all came up in December, they specifically said they knew that we were more conservative. They knew that people like me had gotten elected. They knew that we were going to be a more conservative body. And they intentionally took away our ability to control the power of the purse through September of this year. Mm-hmm. So we're in the process, but here's something else that we're doing. For the first time in decades, we're actually following the appropriate and required budget process. So we're in the process right now. These are not my committees. I'm Judiciary and Natural Resources, as I indicated. I'm also on the Select Committee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. And I'll talk about that a little bit as well. But the Budget and Appropriations Committees and the Defense Committees that have to deal with the funding side of it, we're putting together 12 budget bills that will come together this summer, and we will be sending a budget to the Senate to vote on. And I don't believe they've done that since 1997 was the last time that they've actually done a budget bill the way that we're doing it. So we're really trying to get things back in order. And Kevin McCarthy has been a good leader. Kevin McCarthy has been a solid leader, and he's done what we've asked him to do. So I'm very proud of the fact that he's there and that he's got the knowledge that he does. Steve Scalise, I've become good friends with. I'm probably closer to him in leadership than anyone else. I really like him. I really like his philosophy and what he does. He's a strong advocate for oil and gas, obviously, coming from Louisiana. There are others that I've become close to. Jim Jordan is one of them that I've become very close with because of the committee work I'm doing with him. So I've been able to put together or get myself some good allies, people who have experience and can kind of help me and give me advice and guidance, and I'm excited about that because it definitely is something very different than what I've done in my career. But there's some great people who I'm working with back there, and I want you to know, we sometimes think about DC and we all call it the swamp. I love DC. It's beautiful, and I'm not willing to give away my nation's capital to other people. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. People there are very friendly, but I also want you to know there's a lot of people just like me who want to turn this country around. They know where we are, they know what the issues are that we're dealing with, and they want to turn this country around, and they're working hard to do it. So I think we've got a great group of people back there. As far as the votes, there are several things that I'll tell you some of the key votes that I've taken. I voted yes on the $3.6 trillion Limit Save Grow Act. It will save over $3.6 trillion over the next 10 years. And did some other things, as I just said. That is one of them. It repeals the Green Bad Deal tax credits, and as I said, it incorporates H.R. 1. I also voted to protect women and girls in girls' sports. I wish we didn't have to do that. I don't think that's a federal issue. And a lot of the stuff that we're doing right now, in my opinion, are not federal issues. And you sent me back there and I said, we need to take power out of Washington, D.C., not continuously stockpile more and more power there. But right now, we're at a point in our country's history, we're at a point with our culture right now that it's only Congress in some ways that are trying to protect us from the evilness that is out there. The fact that it took 2 terms for us to pass in the Wyoming legislature to protect girls' sports, that's absurd to me. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. I don't know why that was a debate, but not one Democrat voted in favor of protecting girls' sports and protecting women's sports. I feel very strongly about that. I also voted yes on the Lower Energy Cost Act, and again, this is going to be absolutely instrumental. If we were able to succeed to get this through, it would be absolutely instrumental at unleashing our energy industry in this country, and it would be one of the most important economic drivers we could pursue. I voted yes on and co-sponsored the Parents' Bill of Rights. And again, I don't think that this should be a federal issue, but when you've got the federal Department of Education dictating what our schools are doing, and they're bringing a lot of nonsense into the classroom, this is what we needed to do. And all it says is that it puts parents, not bureaucrats, back in charge of their children's education. It provides for transparency and accountability for school districts so that parents can see what is being taught and have ample opportunities to interact with the teachers. It's the right to know what's being taught, the right to see school budgets and spending reports, the right to protect their children's privacy, and the right to be updated on any violent activity at their child's school. So again, I co-sponsored that. I co-sponsored the bill to repeal the funding for 87,000 IRS agents. Good. And that is included in the debt bill that we passed this week. That repeals the funding for the 87,000 IRS agents. We did it, pardon me?
Also repeal the guns?
I have several gun bills. We have several gun bills that have gone through. This week, we in fact had a hearing with the head of the ATF. I don't know if any of you watched that, but the head of the ATF came in because their new rule on pistol braces will go into effect in June, and it is going to make felons out of millions and millions of people across this country who have the pistol braces. So we brought him in and questioned him this week and questioned him about that, as well as the bump stock. I co-sponsored the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, and that again, we only got one Democrat to vote in favor of that. I was a co-sponsor on ending the COVID national emergency, and the president actually signed that. He threatened that he was going to veto it, but he signed it. So that takes, it's not entirely gone, but at least quite a bit of it is gone. Disapproval of the new WOTUS rules, that's something else that we've been fighting with. And then just as far as, I've co-sponsored, I think, over 70 bills so far. Co-sponsored, so I won't go through all of those, but I've also introduced several pieces of legislation, including in my capacity as the chairman of the Indian and Insular Affairs Subcommittee. Right now, there is a federal law on the books that prohibits our tribes from leasing their land for longer than 25 years. Well, if you want to build any hard infrastructure at all, nobody's going to come onto a reservation and lease for 25 years. If you want a convenience store or a gas station or a distillery or a hotel, nobody's going to do it. So I introduced a bill to expand that to 99 years. And we had a lot of support from Indian tribes around the United States. We brought tribes in from all over the country. They came in and testified. There was one tribe that they have had petitions in front of the Department of Interior to lease some of their land. One of their petitions has been pending for 14 years, and one of their petitions has been pending for 22 years. They can't get the DOI, or the Department of Interior, to act on them. So I have bipartisan support on that. The ranking member on the subcommittee and on the Natural Resource Committee, they have both signed on as co-sponsored. We have people in the Senate, so I am fairly confident we will get that passed and be able to give the tribes a lot more autonomy in terms of being able to determine their own destiny. The other one is a bill to allow our tribes to sell, convey, lease, whatever they want to, of whatever land they own in fee. So the first one would apply to their trust lands, like much of what we have on the reservation up here. But if they own land outright, so the Seminole tribe, for example, they're the second largest cattle producer in Florida, and they own quite a bit of ranch land outright. But there's a question about whether if they ever want to sell it, they have to go to the Department of Interior. Well, I want to make it clear that they don't. It's none of their damn business. If they want to go sell their property, they ought to be able to sell their property. So I've got that bill up as well. That one, the Secretary of Interior is fighting me on. And I'm very disappointed in that. I wish that they would back off and just let us get that through, but we'll keep pushing on that. Another thing I've been doing is I've been looking into the health care that we provide to our tribes. And it's pretty abysmal. It's pretty abysmal in this country. It's wrong. Their life expectancy is substantially less than anybody else because of the health care that we provide them. We had 4 women come in to testify from around the country about the challenges they face in North Dakota, Oklahoma, Portland, and I believe New Mexico. The challenges they face getting doctors and dentists to come and provide health care. So we had a hearing. We invited the head of the Indian Health Service, but she declined to show up, which was too bad because it was very important and very moving testimony provided by these women in terms of the challenges for prenatal care and taking care of children and having adequate services for these people to be able to have their babies on their reservations and things. So I'm going to keep pushing on that one. As I said a moment ago, I've introduced a bill to delist the grizzlies. We got that out of committee this week, just yesterday. We voted on getting that out of committee, so that's going to go to the full floor of delisting the grizzly bear in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So that's a great one that I'm very excited about. And then also the Coal Act. And it would end the existing moratorium on new coal leasing and direct the Secretary of Interior to take action on coal leasing applications that are pending at the DOI. We had Deb Haaland, the Secretary of the Department of Interior, in front of our committee last week. And I asked her about the coal act and about coal permitting. She didn't know anything. And it was very frustrating. It was very frustrating to me. Part of my frustration is this. When these folks are appointed, Democrat or Republican, when they're appointed, these are the smartest people in the history of the world. I mean, they know more than anything about these subjects. And then you put them under oath to address any one of the subjects that they were put in that position for. I don't know. Congresswoman, I don't know. We'll get back to you. Congresswoman, I'm so sorry, I don't know. Do you know we got to depose Anthony Fauci? Our weaponization committee got to depose Anthony Fauci. He said, I don't know, 158 times. Now, if I'd have been in there, I would have said, then we've got two answers here of what we're dealing with. You're either totally incompetent or you're a liar. One of the two. And I'd say it's some of both.
Yes.
Yeah, a combination of both. So, that's what you deal with. We had the head of the Forest Service in this week. And as we all know, so much of our national forests are burning to the ground or they've been killed by fire. And he doesn't know where it came from, so I went back and revisited the year 2000 when they adopted the roadless rule, denied access, management, and use to 58.5 million acres of National Forest Service lands. And I went back to the GAO report at the time describing what was going to happen if they adopted that rule, and I read it to him. Now, I didn't expect this. He admitted that the roadless rule has caused pretty serious problems. He refers to them as challenges. I refer to them as devastation. But he at least admitted that the roadless rule was not what they said it was going to be, and that it has caused serious problems. And I said, my follow-up, an obvious one, so what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about the roadless rule? What are you going to do to take care of this? And the answer is, well, I haven't really looked into it. Your forests are burning to the ground. That was the purpose of the hearing, was the impact of the catastrophic forest fires on our communities. They're burning to the ground. They're killing people out in California. And I said, what are you going to do about it? And his answer was, well, I hadn't thought about that. So anyway, we're trying to hold people accountable. We're trying to make it so that there are some costs. This was the first time he's ever appeared before a committee. In fact, for most of these people, this is the first time they've been forced to go in and actually answer for their decisions. So those are some of the other things that I have done, some of the other bills that I've introduced. But for me and for any of you who heard me when I was campaigning, or you've attended any of my discussions, regulation without representation and that sort of thing, I've continued with the very same agenda, which is trying to get power out of Washington, D.C., try to limit the authority of unelected bureaucrats. We've got to find some way to sanity in terms of the financial situation that we're in. I will tell you that is not the agenda that I have, because that's not the committees that I'm on. Do I constantly talk about cutting spending? And when people come and talk to me about the NDAA or the Farm Bill or things like that, my first comment to every single one of them is, we're going to have to cut spending. We're going to have to figure this out. We've got to cut spending. We don't have any choice. We're the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. $32 trillion in debt is not sustainable. But we've got some good people, Jody Arrington on budget. We've got some good people involved in those committees. And we will be studying and continue to have meetings on these issues as they go forward. So with that, I think what I'd like to do is just go ahead and open it up to questions and comments and have you tell me what's on your mind. Yes, sir.
I have a couple of questions. We see that the World Health Organization is impending overreaching into our sovereignty. We see that the UN is overreaching into our sovereignty. And we also have the Fed Reserve out of control. What can the House do?
So one of the things I've done is I co-sponsored the bill to audit the Fed. So that is one of the first things that we need to do, and we've never done it. And so I don't disagree with you on all three of those things. As far as the WHO, what you're referring to is that Joe Biden has put together a policy position where he says that for any future pandemics, he's going to allow the WHO to dictate what our response is. So instead of our president or our states or our local governments being responsible for addressing whether there's going to be a mask mandate or whether, and I'll come to you in just a minute, or whether there's going to be shutting down of our government or what happens in our schools, Joe Biden is trying to turn that over to the WHO. It is my opinion that any such effort would be considered a treaty, and he does not have the legal authority to do that without the Senate's involvement. So I know right now what they're trying to do is they're trying to find a way to do that and try to avoid or prevent us or for the citizens of this country from challenging those efforts. I can assure you we will do everything in our power to block that, including defunding if we have to. I'd like to defund the WHO. I'd like to defund the UN. I would like to force the UN off of American property. We pay, I think, for 70% of the WHO. I would like to defund the WHO entirely. What happened with this last pandemic and the cover-up for China in terms of the origin of the virus, it's been a complete and total disaster. If they couldn't react to that right, they shouldn't exist. The damage they've caused has been extreme. So those are obviously huge, huge, huge issues. Not everybody's going to agree with what I just said back in Congress, but I can assure you there's nobody that I know of, other than the Democrats, but none of the Republicans would ever agree to allow the WHO to dictate our policy in this country.
One question, how many rhinos do they have in the house?
How many what?
Rhinos.
You know, it is part of why I said what I said earlier today in my comments is that there are people who are definitely more liberal than I am. And where you're going to see them is in states where the populace is more liberal. You know, we picked up 4 seats in New York that we've not had before. That's what got us the majority. Well, those 4 gentlemen are going to be a bit more liberal than I am because they have to be to get elected. That's just the reality. If we want to keep our majority and keep pushing forward with our agenda, we've got to recognize that there's going to be a fairly broad spectrum. But what I've observed is I think those people have moved further to the conservative side as we've had these debates and these discussions. And that's what I think is a really good development. Do I agree with them or they agree with me on everything? No. We're also not on the same committees. We don't do the same kind of work. But when push comes to shove and we need those votes, like we did on H.R. 1, they all voted for H.R. 1. They all voted for H.R. 1. I'm not sure that they would have had we not had the opportunity to interact and work with each other the way that we did with the Kevin McCarthy vote. So they voted for H.R. 1, they voted for the bill this week, they voted for the things such as, protecting girls' sports. So there are more liberal people than I am. There's no question about that. Part of it is situational for the situation that they're in, but when push came to shove, they did the right thing. So I'll give them all credit for that.
Have you been able to stop the money going to Ukraine?
No, because that was included in the $1.7 trillion omnibus spending bill. That was the other thing. But when it comes up for vote for us, they don't have it. They know that. They know that if this vote comes back up in terms of Ukraine, they know that the House is not going to support it. We voted on a bill yesterday to take all of our troops out of Somalia. I voted in favor of it. Almost 60 Republicans voted in favor of that. It was the Democrats and the more liberal Republicans, the more military industrial complex folks. The conservatives are voting to get our troops out. So I voted for that. I voted to get our troops out of Syria. And there is not the stomach. We have spent between 113 and 118 billion dollars in Ukraine, and we can't get an audit. There has so far not been an audit. We don't know where the money is going. They will not disclose the information. We don't know if it's making a difference. We did see with the leaked documents that came out a couple of weeks ago that there's serious questions as to how long the Ukraine can hold on, and that there's a different narrative out there about Ukraine than perhaps what's actually happening on the ground. So you've got a much stiffer uphill battle in the House for additional funding for the Ukraine. They'll have funding for this year, but I don't think they're going to get any more. Good question back here.
$60 billion to guarantee their union workers have retirement.
In the Ukraine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other one is Joe Biden's income for life on Wuhan.
So one of the other select committees, in the process of electing the speaker, we created 2 select committees. One of them is the select committee on the weaponization of the federal government, and I'm on that. So those are the Twitter files. We had Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger a couple of weeks ago. That is going after what Anthony Fauci did in terms of the misinformation. That is the FBI, the Department of Justice. We just released the transcript or the information from the Michael Mueller, the guy who wrote the letter that was signed by the 51 intel folks, allegedly intelligent folks, but saying that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation in October of 2020. We're exposing a lot of what has happened. Is that satisfactory? No, but we have 1/2 of one house of government. Keep that in mind. It's a matter of exposure at this point and putting the Senate in a difficult position on some of these bills. And then also we will be coming up with, we will be coming up with bills. One of the bills I'd like to see is that to the extent any former federal employee engages in the kind of behavior they did with that letter, they would lose their pensions. That is something that I think that we should consider doing. So 51 folks formerly employed by the intelligence community, all federal employees, signed that letter in October of 2020. And you know why they signed it? You know why the guy who wrote the letter, you want to know why he signed it? Because they wanted to get Joe Biden elected.
Yeah, exactly.
They knew it was a lie. They knew it was a lie. So another bill that I want to do, so we've also uncovered a lot of individual federal employees violating people's constitutional rights, our First Amendment rights. The day that Matt Taibbi was testifying before our committee, the IRS went to his home in New Jersey. Obviously intimidation tactic. We know of people who violated First Amendment rights, Fourth Amendment rights, Fifth Amendment rights. One of the things that I want to do is have a bill that if you do, and you are, someone could bring a lawsuit against you as a federal employee for violating your civil rights, your constitutional rights, and you could be held personally liable. So right now, under 42 USC Section 1983, if the town of Upton were to search my home without a search warrant, I can bring what's called a Section 1983 action. I can protect my civil rights by suing a state employee or a state agency if they violate my civil rights. And then it goes to court. You take it into federal court and you decide, and a jury decides it. I can bring that lawsuit. I have no mechanism to sue a federal employee. I have no ability to sue. They can take away my rights until the cows come home. They can individually be surveilling me like there's no tomorrow, and I cannot personally hold them responsible for that. And I think we need to change that. I think that there needs to be accountability for these decisions because, especially within the Department of Justice and the FBI, they've really gone rogue. They have really, and I never thought I would say that. I support our law enforcement. I absolutely support our law enforcement, and especially at the state and local level. But the FBI, the things that we have uncovered, really have been very, very, very shocking to me with what our federal government is becoming. So those are some of the things we can do.
Have you noticed any reaction from the Democrats where you're not under the thumb of the Speaker, which they have totally been under Nancy, and you think that they would say, hey, maybe this thing will work after all?
I think that they are a little bit envious because they are not, they truly are. They have been under her thumb and for the last 4 years and then even before that.
Yeah.
Republicans are more independent-minded is something that I would say. I think it's part of what makes us Republicans is we tend to be more independent-oriented. What we are hearing behind the scenes is they admit we run a much better shop than they did. And what they mean by that is that, so they used to have proxy voting. We got rid of proxy voting. Votes would take hours. they'd call a vote at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and it might still be open at 7 o'clock at night as they're trying to get people drug in there to vote or get their proxies in. It would take 4 hours to do a vote when they were doing the proxies. We don't allow proxies, as I said. You want to be there, show up and vote, or your vote doesn't count. But we go in, we have a 15-minute vote. It might go 20 minutes. You might keep it open 20 minutes. Then we have either 2-minute votes or a 5-minute vote. And then we're done. And then we don't waste a lot of time. So I think that they're recognizing that we have a lot more independence and autonomy, but then they're also more collectivist minded. So some of them think that's a good thing, some of them don't. Yes?
Harriet, one of my main concerns is who on earth is running our government? It definitely isn't Joe Biden.
No, it
He's
isn't.
not
Joe
here.
Biden is suffering from very serious dementia. And even his videotape that was released this week, he wasn't even capable of getting through a sentence without stumbling and very, very weak message.
And you can also see from his actions, he's compromised. I
Well-
mean, you guys got to prove it first, but
We've proven it. So one of the things that has been proven, and this hasn't been my committees, it's the Oversight Committee with Representative Comer. A couple of weeks ago, he disclosed the fact that they have uncovered millions of dollars of payments from the Chinese Communist Party to the Bidens. And there's 12 of them. 12 Bidens have been receiving
Yeah,
funding
exactly.
directly from the Chinese Communist Party to the tune of millions of dollars. The day that announcement was made, what was one of the other things that was leaked that day? Do any of you remember? That the district attorney in New York was going to indict Donald Trump.
yes, just to pull us
And
away
all
from
of
that
a
story.
sudden, nobody was talking about the millions of dollars that has gone to the
Exactly.
Bidens. It was a diversion tactic, and they didn't even have the indictment ready yet, but somebody dropped it. They leaked that was happening. And then all of the press dutifully ran over and covered that, oh my God, Donald Trump's going to be indicted. Not focusing on the fact that we had millions of dollars of compromised funds. So far what Comer has been able to uncover was that there were close to probably upwards of 30 LLCs created by the Biden family. And the Chinese Communist Party would send money to this one, and then it would transfer to this one, and then it would transfer to this one, and then it would transfer to that one, and then you would write a check for shoes and groceries and everything else. These LLCs were paying the direct expenses of the Bidens. So it wasn't even I'm a pastor, so I own an office building in Cheyenne, and it's an LLC. The revenue passes through to me, but I have to deduct expenses. And that LLC doesn't buy my boots and my earrings and my eyeglasses.
Buying. What did
They were buying, well, what they bought was the loyalty. But what they didn't even make an effort to, they weren't paying taxes. You can't, a business doesn't pay personal expenses. That is a form of so there's all kinds of stuff that's going on. But it was this money laundering scheme where Chinese Communist Party is literally paying millions of dollars to these various Bidens through these LLCs.
They're
And
buying
these,
our land, our secrets, all of the above.
we have 2 bills that I have co-sponsored. One is to prohibit China from purchasing any more land in the United States and also any sensitive sites. And that also includes Venezuela and North Korea and Russia and Iran and maybe a couple of other countries. We're trying to stop that. Those have not been taken up by the Senate, but I have co-sponsored both of those bills. We also, we did a bill, Joe Biden has been draining our strategic petroleum reserve.
Yes, exactly.
It's down over 40%. It's at its lowest point since the 1980s. And the reason it's since the 1980s is that's when they were filling it. It takes 9 years to fill our strategic petroleum reserve. He has been selling SPR oil to China. So we passed a bill, 100 Democrats in support of it. We passed a bill to block him from selling SPR oil to China.
And another thing, that spy balloon, it was going over all of our refineries, like our Newcastle refinery, the refineries in Montana, as well as our bases.
It was everything.
So they have They have
was
all that
everything.
information.
Those are
That's
the
scary.
things, those overt acts on the side of Biden, what Biden is doing. It's so clear to me that he is compromised in terms of China. But we know from the laptop that his son is just a despicable human being. we know from the laptop he's that, but we also know how corrupt it is. But right now, we don't have a national media who's willing to call it out. But I will also say they're getting it. So when you say who's running the country, it's his handlers. It's the Susan Rices of the world. But I also want to say something else that I have found in being back there. We oftentimes think that the people back there are very, very smart. A lot of them are not. They're just not. I'm sorry. And I don't mean to be rude, but that Deb Haaland, she's just not a bright woman. She's not. She's not good at what she's doing. She's overwhelmed in terms of the task at hand. She is not capable of handling it. She's just simply a figurehead. But that's where a lot of department heads are. They are not expected to actually oversee and run the agency that they're appointed to oversee and run. So yes, sir.
One of my concerns would be what we see in the federal government of taking private land, really increasing a lot. So some of the things I've been reading is, and it's not only the federal government, but it's a couple of other people, too large billionaire people that is taking up the private land. And they have an agenda to do it, to control the food and everything else with their global warming issues. But one of my questions would be, do you see any concern with that aspect of it in what you was talking about?
I'm
with
very
opening the
concerned.
Indian land up to that possibility also.
For leasing, the trust
Well,
land.
for selling,
Okay.
like,
But we all have the right to do that. Under
Right.
the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment, we have the right to do that. And I don't believe in constraining people exercising their constitutional rights. And I actually think we need to make sure that the Indians have as much freedom as you and I do to make decisions about our own real property. So,
I totally agree with that. I'm on the Cherokee roll, and my family,
Yep.
goes back to Indian, my heritage from there in Oklahoma. But what I meant was that was not by so much them not being allowed to do that, is more of laws being put in to control the government from taking.
that I agree with. So I'm a person who advocates for trying to take power away from the federal government.
Right.
And there are several mechanisms by which our federal government has continued to take control of real property. Number one, I would like to make it so that there's absolutely no net gain in terms of federal land. We need to stop the federal government from buying land to the extent that it does. We need to be doing a bill on no net gain for federal land. In the state of Wyoming, they already own 48% of our surface estate. They own the 112 million acres, I believe, in the country. We don't need the federal government controlling any more real property. But we also have to look at that from the standpoint of conservation easements. Because what a lot of people don't understand is these conservation easements that are put in place, it's the federal government that's given the enforcement authority on those. So an example is conservation easements from the Stock Growers Land Trust. And I've represented stock growers here in Wyoming for years. I'm friends with Jim Magagna. I like those people, but I disagree with the idea of perpetual conservation easements. And that's what they're putting in place. And in those agreements, it specifically states that it is the USDA that has the legal authority to enforce those agreements, meaning they have federalized the authority on those. I don't like perpetual conservation easements. It violates our Constitution. We have a rule against perpetuities in our Constitution. And I don't think we would be very happy if people from 1692 were dictating our land use today, yet under conservation easements, people in 2493 will be told what to do by the people who made the rules today. And I don't agree with that. I think it's wrong. Perpetual land control is, it's allowing the dead hand from the grave to control, and I don't believe in it. I disagree with that. So those are some of the things that, yes, I'm terribly concerned about the federal government continuing to expand its footprint, number one. And I also share your concerns about people like Bill Gates buying up all the farm ground. I do. I have great concerns about that. I just don't know that there's a federal fix for it. That's the challenge that we have. But I think that it is of great concern, and I think communities have a reason to ask questions when somebody like that comes in and buys huge swaths of land. I think it's something we've got to pay a lot of attention to. I do.
We have time for one more question and then.
I never hear.
How come he hasn't been impeached yet? I mean, when the Democrats were in charge, they were keeping score. And Nancy Pelosi, every time you turned around, she'd beat her chest. But it's not as if the evidence isn't there.
Well, the border alone. The border alone.
Yes.
But I think that probably what you're going to see is an effort to go forward with impeaching Mayorkas first. And then I think that you may see that. One of the things that happens when you go down that road is it derails the rest of your agenda. It derails everything else you're going to do if that's what you're going to focus on. Now, the Democrats, when they were there and bringing the impeachment, they didn't care about that. They didn't care about actually accomplishing something for the people of this country. But we do. And so that's the balance you have. That's what you do. I don't disagree that he's absolutely violated the law. Joe Biden, being the person, what he's done on the border, he's the largest human trafficker in U.S. history. He's the largest drug smuggler in U.S. history. I've been down on the border. I was down there 2 months ago in Yuma and had an opportunity to meet with the law enforcement folks down there. We're now close to $15 billion that the cartels have earned in human trafficking in the last 2 years since he's been in office. And it's an astoundingly inhumane situation that he is creating. We were out there about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning at one of the areas where there's the wall and then there's a gap where the day he took office, they stopped all construction. The heavy equipment is still there. All the materials are still there. It's millions of dollars worth of equipment and materials laying on the ground rotting. And there was about a 50-foot gap, and I was talking to one of the law enforcement officers, and he said, this is a hot spot. Well, yeah, I wonder why. But he said, right on the other side of that wall, they have found over 200 bodies. And it's not because people died because of exposure or lack of water. Literally, it's right there. It's because the cartels killed them. You can't come across that border unless you go through a cartel. If you try to come across that border, they will kill you. And the inhumanity of it, the hospital, they have $26 million, at that time they had $26 million in uncompensated care. They had, I mean, I could just go on and on and on, the impact on our food supply. About, at certain times of the year, 70% of the food that we consume in this country comes from Yuma, Arizona. The devastation that they have done to the farmers down there. We met with the farmers, we met with the hospital, we met with community leaders, we met with law enforcement. We met, and then we had a hearing. We had a public hearing, and he is definitely he should be impeached over that. I don't disagree with you. That is just something that I have not pushed forward with, and I'm getting more questions about it. When I go back this next time, I'll talk to the leadership about that. I know you have a question, so
I have one. It's for the elderly.
yes.
People have come to me, being that I'm older, and and there's people even from South Dakota that has come to me and addressed me and asked, what is going on with this digital currency or money when we get old and they want to, I don't know how to do that on the stupid cell phone.
Well, I think that the bigger, there's many concerns that I have with it, including total and complete control. And all you have to see is what happened in Canada. What happened in Canada with the truckers? How were they able to break them? They basically took their money away. They froze their bank accounts, and they blocked their ability to access cash.
That's what everybody's
So that's the worry when you have a government that has become as weaponized as this government has, is that's the fear. And so you're not the only ones talking about it. I can assure you that in Washington, D.C., that is front and center. There is no interest at all in Congress of forcing people onto digital currency because we recognize, we created a select committee on the weaponization of the federal government. We recognize the risks that we run in allowing for digital currency, and especially on the conservative side, because so many people have been demonetized with YouTube, or they have been impacted by somewhat of, I guess you'd say, the cancel culture. They know what can happen if you give that power to
I
the
know,
government.
just like
So-
they want us to go like whatever, China and Brazil and all the rest of them, and
Well,
That's
there is,
not-
the people, we get it. We're not passing the laws for it. It's, okay, I know that there are some that would like to, but
you won't think that you
they're
will
gonna,
pass.
the House isn't gonna support that.
good.
The House is not gonna
Good.
support that.
Very concerned.
There was just one more question. Yes, sir.
So you just talked about the horrific situation at our border.
Yeah.
And I'll give you another example. It was in the news yesterday. The Border Patrol came across an 8-year-old girl who had 67 samples of DNA inside her. This is happening. So it is a tragedy. And next month, Title 42 is
Yes,
set to
it's
expire.
expiring.
And right now, according to Andy Biggs, the representative from Arizona, there's 700 to 1 million people massed at our border.
Yes.
Yeah.
So considering that, and I know oil rigs are pretty amazing, and wouldn't it be more appropriate for the Republican Party Congress to go down to the border next week? And because the messaging from the Congress is that, and it's not only around that, but around this bill that you have. See, they're not coming out there to say, don't worry, we will not default on our loans, because that's the biggest thing that people are worried. That's one of the things. It's not going to affect Social Security. We're not going to default on our country's bonds and stuff. That's going to be top priority, but that's not coming out. People aren't hearing that.
Well, and that's one of the challenges that we have because of the national media. There's no question about it. But what I will tell you, and again, it goes to your point, we're not hearing it. I can't even tell you the number of times we have been down to the border. So I
know. Yeah.
But there are probably, I wouldn't be surprised if during this particular recess, Andy Biggs has numerous people down at the border in Arizona. The Texas delegation, the Judiciary Committee, we went down, the Democrats, none of them showed up. We held a hearing on the border. And so we have been, and I agree with you. One of the things that people won't talk about is exactly what you just said. That when you come across that border, they actually have wristbands. They have wristbands now, color-coded wristbands. And if you're from China, you're going to pay they have price lists. You're going to pay $50,000. If you're from India, you're going to pay $40,000. If you're from Guatemala, you may pay $8,000. But you don't pay it in cash. You pay a portion of it in cash, and then the remainder you have to work off. You work off either by human trafficking or sex trafficking other people, or drug running, or working in the businesses like I've been uncovered in New York. That's part of why it's such an incredibly inhumane conditions. They are incredibly inhumane conditions that Biden has created on the border. So we are working with that. We passed out last week. We started at 10 o'clock in the morning. We finished at 2 o'clock in the morning. We passed out a committee, the strongest border control bill and enforcement bill in the history of Congress. And it's going to go to the floor in May. We will be debating that and voting on that next month to try to force, again, the Senate and the President to do something. So we're passing the bills to do this. Some of the things that include is if you're going to claim asylum, you can come and claim asylum, but you're either held in detention or you're returned to Mexico until your case is heard. They're saying now that they are, I think, 2033 before they're going to be able to hear the pending asylum claims in New York.
Anybody's going to show up.
Well, and we get that. We get that. I mean, we understand. But they didn't finish the wall. That is included in our border bill. That is included as finishing the wall. They work. That is included in there. So yeah, we're passing the bill. It'll come to the floor in May. Now, there's misgivings, and this is where it comes down to. This is where hopefully that cohesiveness will stand, because that one's a little tougher for some people to be able to vote on, because it is the toughest border enforcement bill in the history of our country.
Just one quick comment though on Kevin McCarthy and the vote in January. So I was one of the persons that called you and said no on McCarthy, because maybe he's changed now. That's only because of what the 6 plus the 14 did. And that wasn't a spontaneous thing that happened. That started back in June. Matt Gates and some of the people started working. And so when they came up, so I would have liked to see Wyoming as being, if you couldn't vote against McCarthy like this 20 we're doing, that brave woman, new rep from Indiana, she did a no vote.
I think she did a present vote.
Right, to give them the ability to negotiate the things that you were saying are so good that's happening now, which they are. They took the clause away from Kevin McCarthy. That's why he's acting the way he is. Everything that you said, from the 72-hour to read a bill, from the one bill only, the limits all came out of those 20 people.
I agree with you, but all of that was agreed to prior to January 3rd. Because that was the conversation I had with him. But I want to tell you something else.
Well, we can differ with that.
Okay, but I want to tell you something else. And here's why it was important for me to do what I did. As I said earlier, my race was pretty high profile. My race was very high profile. We had to, in order to have someone other than Kevin McCarthy, we had to flip 199 votes. The Democrats had to flip 5. Had I, with as high profile as I was at that time, had I come out against Kevin McCarthy, I'll tell you what would have happened. We would have had a consensus candidate, and it would have been devastating for us. And here's what I mean by that. Starting in November, the Democrats were sending out emails to people like John Duarte from California, who's in a D+9 seat. The people from New York City that I was just talking about, they received a very detailed email in November describing how, if they were to work with the Democrats to get a consensus candidate, they would be promised the chairman of the Ag Committee. They were promised the chairman, as freshmen, the chairman of the Ag Committee. A consensus candidate would have been somebody like the guy from Michigan, who's been Upton, was one of them they were talking about, who never would have put forth our agenda and done what we were doing. What was going on behind the scenes? I gave you a little bit of it today, but I'm going to tell you there was a lot more going on behind the scenes. Had we left that Saturday morning without that vote and we'd come in on Monday at noon, we all knew that if we left and went home that weekend, it wouldn't be Kevin McCarthy on Monday, but it wouldn't be anybody we wanted either. At that point, they were going to be able to flip those 5 votes, and we would have had a consensus candidate. That's why when we left there, and I was there, I know you may disagree with me, but I was there. When we had the 14th vote and Kevin McCarthy lost, they said to adjourn. So we adjourned, and I knew that we had lost it at that point, and everybody else did too. We knew that when we came back in on Monday, it was going to be bad. And at that point was when Matt Gaetz walked over to Kevin McCarthy and said, I'll vote for you. We came back in, we came within seconds of adjourning. We had to run back in there, change our vote to no on the adjournment, came back in there, did the 15th vote, and he won that vote. But had we not done that, they would have had the 5, and they would have flipped those 5. So there was a lot more going on there in terms of the strategy. So I respected that you disagreed with me, and as I said, I talked to a lot of people. But had I switched, that would have been such a bomb, that would have been such a bomb in the middle of that room that we may very well have ended up with somebody like a Fred Upton rather than a Kevin McCarthy.
We can respectfully disagree.
Well, I was there.
Yeah, no, I was there too.
Yeah. So that's what happened.
Who was your man?
What I'm saying is,
I'm the one who was the problem, right?
well,
There's the problem.
no, I would have liked Jim Jordan. I know he.
No,
didn't-
and I wouldn't have voted for
I
Jim
know
Jordan.
he didn't want it because.
No, I wouldn't have voted for Jim Jordan. You know why? And I told them, so the 20 came to me, and several of them came and sat with me and said, what do you think about Jim Jordan? And I said, I love Jim Jordan. But I said that the secret to our success 2 years from now in keeping the House, taking the Senate, and the White House runs through the Judiciary Committee. And the only person who can run that Judiciary Committee is Jim Jordan.
I understand that philosophy. I'm just saying if there was an offer, you asked me to do it.
And I love Jim Jordan. And Jim
I know he
Jordan,
didn't want it.
and he voted for Kevin McCarthy.
All I'm saying is, we got what we needed, and the people that got it were the 20. Nobody
And,
else.
well,
Nobody else.
I would disagree, but that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Congresswoman, we are at time.
Okay.
We'd love to grab some pictures.
I support scholarship.